Welcome back, students. We're going to start our look at Topic 7, the United States in World War II, with the first lesson examining the rise of totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is a style of dictatorship that is something somewhat unique to the 20th century. We will see totalitarian regimes arise in Europe as well as Japan after World War I, and their aggressive expansion beyond that is what leads to the Second World War. Totalitarianism in general is, as I said, different from other previous dictatorships in that the goal is not just to control the government, for one person to control the government, but to control every aspect of its citizens' lives. And this is kind of summed up in George Orwell's book 1984, actually my favorite book, which is something of a send-up to totalitarian regimes in the Big Brother is watching you concept here. Totalitarian governments usually are headed by a strong, charismatic leader, as we'll see in each of these cases, except for Japan. You have sort of a charismatic dictator who seizes power. They will use terror. They will spy on their own people and use secret police to impose the will of the state on its citizens. They control the media, and they will use propaganda to indoctrinate the people into whatever the way of thinking is. Oftentimes it's loyalty to the state or to the individual dictator, unquestionably so. And they will also indoctrinate their population early on. Many totalitarian states are very focused on reaching out to the youth, creating youth groups like the Hitler Youth and others, or taking control of the public schools and using it as a way of indoctrinating the kids early on, getting people when they're more impressionable, sort of learning their way in the world at that point. And much more easy to sort of mold them into long-term, hardcore loyalists to the regime. They will crush any opposition. They will censor their political rivals and oftentimes outlaw any sort of other political parties that might oppose them. And lastly, in a totalitarian regime, the individuals, the people, have no rights, no individual rights. In many cases, your will, your rights, your needs are supposed to be subservient to the will and the needs of the nation. The first of these dictators is Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin will rise to the head of the Communist Party in the Soviet Union upon the death of Vladimir Lenin. Lenin is the guy who orchestrated or at least led much of the communist revolution that overthrew the Russian government during World War I and changed it into the Soviet Union. When he dies, Stalin has positioned himself through his own machinations and through intimidation and murder, keeps the position as head of the Communist Party and therefore the head of the Soviet Union. Stalin is much less interested than Lenin was in exporting communism and creating a worldwide communist revolution. He's much more interested in consolidating his own power, and he of all of these is going to be the longest lasting of these dictators and will end with great amounts of authority in the Soviet Union. His efforts to transform the nation into an industrial power to try and catch up with the other great nations of the world, because Russia was pretty far behind many other European countries in the United States and Japan, and his efforts to collectivize farms, basically taking away private-run farms and collectivizing them into commune-run farms, will see some results, at least on the industrialization level. Russia does industrialize at a pretty rapid pace, but it will also cost the lives of an estimated 10 million people through the famine, particularly caused by collectivized farming and the forced movement of people around the country. During the Great Terror, Stalin will purge the Communist Party and the Red Army, the Russian army, of any suspected people who he thinks are disloyal to him. And there's another estimated million or so people who are either killed or imprisoned in these work camps in Siberia, a northern region of Russia, called the gulags. And of course, Stalin will use propaganda to create a cult of personality, a sort of idea focused around he is the source of all things good in Russia, and all the bad things come from his enemies. He will do this through billboards, art, schools, the newspaper, and so forth. This particular picture here, this young lady, this is a young woman from Eastern Soviet Union that he poses with, trying to sort of give himself this grandfatherly image. I think it was maybe a couple years later, she and her family were sent to the gulags and died there. First of the fascist dictators is going to be Benito Mussolini of Italy. And one of the commonalities we'll see is the contributions of the results of World War I and the Great Depression to the rise and power of these groups. And Mussolini is no different. There's a lot of political chaos and economic depression that will lead to his rise to power. Italy had not gained the land that they thought they should as a result of World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. There was a growing communist party in Italy, and as it is growing, peasants in the countryside are seizing the land from the former nobles, the landowners. Workers are going on nationwide strikes, or taking control of the factories outright. And so there was a big desire to try and quell this communist, and that's where the fascist party comes from. They are in opposition to the communist party, and Mussolini will pledge the fascist party to restore order and to make Italy a great nation again. His black shirts, his paramilitary fascist organization, will fight the communists and the socialists in the streets. And he will march on Rome with an organized sort of group of these black shirts coming in with him, appearing to sort of come out of nowhere and join up in this sort of what looked like a spontaneous rebellion, but was not. And fearing a revolution, King Victor Emmanuel III of Italy will make Mussolini the dictator in 1922. And his regime will oppose liberalism and socialism in all its forms, outlaws political parties except for the fascist parties. They suppress labor strikes because labor has closer ties with communism, taking control of the press to suppress any contrary opinions, creates a secret police that spies on its citizens, and organized youth groups to indoctrinate the young, much as we had seen with other totalitarian regimes. In Germany, anger at the harsh treatment of the Treaty of Versailles after World War I and the government's inability to deal with the Great Depression is going to lead to the rise of the Nazi Party under Adolf Hitler. The Weimar Republic, which was established after World War I, is actually probably one of the world's most progressive, open democracies at the time, but it proved incapable of dealing with the double problems of paying back the reparations due from the Treaty of Versailles and dealing with the problems of the Great Depression. The Nazi Party is formed in opposition to communism and socialism, which was on the rise in Germany in response to the issues of the Depression, or any other ideology that put class issues ahead of the nation as a whole. In the Nazi ideal, the nation was the ultimate. Hitler joins the Nazi Party and rises to its leadership. He's actually arrested for trying to orchestrate an overthrow of the government, and while in prison he writes a book called Mein Kampf, where he lays out his plans. He blames Germany's economic problems and its losses in World War I on being stabbed in the back by those who were disloyal, particularly the communists and the Jews are blamed. He ascribes to social Darwinism and eugenics and the idea of an ethnic nationalism, that being ethnically German meant you were German and all others were outsiders and inferior people. And he, like Mussolini, promised to make Germany great again, to restore it to its former glory. The Nazis will gain control of the Reichstag, which is the German parliament, and Hitler is appointed chancellor in 1933. Later on, when von Hindenburg dies, Hitler will become both chancellor and the president. They will set up a secret police called the Gestapo to crush all opposition. They will also use propaganda and a state-controlled press to create a cult of personality, as well as controlling the public schools and the Hitler Youth. And of course, they reject openly freedom and democracy and promoted over that loyalty to the state. Now, Hitler's economic policies of rearmament and massive public works will in fact end the Depression in Germany, but at a great cost to, well, many, many things. A liberal democracy, constitutional democracy, had arisen in Japan after World War I, but much like with the other European powers, its inability to deal with the Great Depression discredited it, and we saw a return to much more prominence for the military controlling Japan. While Japan doesn't really fit neatly into the totalitarian dictatorship mold, it did have well-known leaders like Tojo as head of the Japanese military and the Emperor Hirohito. They will follow many similar policies to totalitarians, though, ending democratic freedoms, crushing opposition, censoring the media, teaching obedience through the schools, and they encouraged a sort of extreme ethnic nationalism supported by social Darwinism of Japanese superiority to all other peoples, including other Asian peoples, much like the Germans did. And they were attempting in their efforts to create what they called the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere, which would promote a cultural and economic unity of East Asia and Oceania underneath the control of the Japanese. And this is where the conflict with the United States is going to come into play, as they're attempting to control East Asia and the Pacific, and the United States is also expanding into the Pacific at the same time. The aggressive actions of these totalitarian states in their expansion and imperialism is what's going to lead to the Second World War. But what we see from the rest of the world, particularly the League of Nations, is a policy of appeasement, where they will continually give in to these aggressive actions, particularly by Adolf Hitler, in the hopes that they can avoid another war, that he will become satisfied with that. And as we can see from this political cartoon, the way it lays out and mocks appeasement, it is not a very effective strategy. Some examples here: 1931, sometimes considered the beginning of World War II, Japan invades Manchuria, region of northeastern China. In 1935, Italy will invade Ethiopia, one of the few remaining independent nations in Africa. 1935 and 36, Germany is going to reclaim the Saar Valley and send troops into the Rhineland, which is a direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles terms. 1937, we will see the aptly named Rape of Nanjing, when the Japanese invade the Chinese northern capital and go on a massive violent spree, murdering an estimated 200,000 people, often through beheading, as well as raping, torturing, and mutilating untold hundreds of thousands more. 1936 and 1939, we'll see Italy and Germany supporting a fascist side in a civil war in Spain against the Republican Democratic government there. And in this, the fascist nations will loan tanks and planes, but also their pilots and drivers as well, practicing techniques of strafing and dive bombing civilian targets that will be used in World War II and had already been used by the British against the colonials. The Soviet Union is the only power to support the Republican side in this. The United States, Great Britain, and France stay out, do nothing in response to it. 1938, Germany annexes Austria in what's called the Anschluss. 1938, they will also demand the Sudetenland, which is a region of Czechoslovakia, and the Western powers will give in to all of this. And when we examine this idea of appeasement, it clearly is not an effective strategy, and we have to wonder, why would these nations do this? Well, for one, many of the Western powers saw the communists in Soviet Union as a greater threat than Hitler, but also, keep in mind how damaging World War I was to Europe, and these leaders wanted to avoid another massive destructive war at all costs, and they really feared that their people, both in Western Europe and in the United States, would not be willing to go to war again against somebody even like Hitler. All right, take care of the Lesson 1 graphic organizer. I love you. Bye-bye.